welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. As always, we appreciate you joining us. I am joined today by Anna Beth Gorman. She's the Executive Director of the Women's Foundation of Arkansas. We've had you on before as an analyst, as a candidate, and obviously as an Executive Director.
Yes, I'm wearing my nonprofit hat today. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. Before we get into some things happening in the state legislature, I want to back up a little bit. There has been for the past year a study going on, a Women's Commission that former Governor Asa Hutchinson convened. His former Chief of Staff, Allison Williams, was leading that. You were a big part of that. What were some of the big takeaways from that commission study that you think people ought to be aware of?
Well, I also think people need to know the context of that. A lot of states have women's commissions. It's not unusual. Arkansas actually hadn't had an organized women's commission and a report in almost 50 years.
Yes, I read that. Going back to the bumpers.
Right, and there was a seminal report that came out in 1973, and it really did a snapshot of women in the Arkansas economy. At the time, was kind of groundbreaking for Arkansas to kind of do a self-assessment if it did. And our organization actually looked at that 1973 report 40 years later and actually discovered almost nothing had changed for women. At the time, 10 years ago, we didn't have women sitting on state or college boards at the time. But we're talking about the report now, and so we brought that forward to the former administration and said, this will be the 50th anniversary, this will be a great time, we're coming out of the pandemic, we really want to look at women in the economy, how we can get women back in the economy. And so that's what this report did. It actually looked at, the charge was specifically to understand how can Arkansas support women back in the economy post the pandemic, looking at childcare, the challenges for childcare, barriers for entry in the workforce. And that's what this committee did, and some of the results were really, really interesting, or recommendations rather, were really interesting.
Give me a little bit about what some of the barriers are to that workforce placement, whether it's entrepreneurism or just working for another employer.
Sure, I mean, a significant barrier of entry in Arkansas still is childcare. Actually, that was one of, I think the commission, which was made up of appointees by the former administration, they were all kind of taken aback by how big of an issue that is. I mean, the childcare economy in Arkansas, access to good quality childcare, affording it,
an aging workforce. Leaving, right.
Leaving, and so it's really, that's a significant barrier, but also a significant barrier for women continues to be access to mentors, access to resources and things that steer women to opportunities in our workforce. So that continues to be an issue.
And on that child care front, because I've led a couple of conversations on this from a couple of different nonprofits that have convened, it's that there's just a disproportionate burden placed on women to supply child care. It's not that it is defined that women have to be the child care provider in this age, but it is, they typically are. It skews that direction, and therefore it's become the problem that it's become.
Well, and you have to consider we have a lot of female single heads of households. So no, this isn't just a woman's issue when we talk about the child care economy. In a traditional family where you've got two adults working, yes, both of them are considering that, but that's not the case in Arkansas. We've got a significant portion of our population that are single heads of household, and so it comes down to one individual, most often women, to figure this out.
Where do things go now that the commission study is out there? Where are we going to see that translate into action?
Well, the former governor was very clear that this is not the government's sole responsibility to solve these challenges. And really the challenge was to cross-section of stakeholder partners to develop solutions. And that's what the exciting part for the Women's Foundation of Arkansas, the organization that I lead, is that we're going to take this report, its recommendations, around the state and really try to recruit those stakeholders. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunity going to revisit where the commission held their meetings and bringing in business, city, local governments to really talk about how we can support women. Our organization does a lot to support entrepreneurship, and so one of the things that this commission did do was, at the end of the recommendations, they identified already key partners. So Arkansas State University received $200,000 to expand its Women's Business Leadership Center, and they're creating a Delta Leadership Academy for up-and-coming female entrepreneurs in the Arkansas Delta.
Yeah, all right. So Senate Bill 71 gets amended this week in committee. I actually happened to be watching the committee hearing when it happened. It was a pretty massive amendment in there that kind of changed the scope, quite frankly, and the focus of it. It basically, according to the bill sponsor, Senator Dan Sullivan, he says this will effectively end affirmative action. Are we ready to end affirmative action?
You know, affirmative action is such a philosophical conversation, right? I want to start by saying, like, is the reality in our state that there's an even playing field? We can never even define what an even playing field is. You know, I understand from the intent of the legislation, it's really addressing affirmative action in higher education. But you spoke to this amendment, and now what the new bill would potentially look like. There are real concerns about fallout of unintended consequences, about how affirmative action is very broadly and vaguely not defined in what this bill would do, because it would impact a lot of our state's current economic development work, by just assuming that we don't need to have targeted strategies or innovations to address where we see that people could really need some help and assistance accessing existing resources in our state.
Yeah, the debate in the committee hearing between Senator Sullivan and Senator Clark Tucker of Little Rock was Senator Sullivan basically saying this is going to level the playing field in higher education and in government, is kind of part of his intention, whereas Senator Tucker was saying, I am reading this bill and you are telling me that racism and sexism is dead in Arkansas. And it did not end well on that conversation with the exchange. I think they were cordial about it. To me, the purpose of the programs that are in place now, which is that a university will aim to do these things to have more diversity in its on its campuses or in its student body, or that government will try to award some of these contracts, is that you're being intentional.
That's right.
About this. Maybe speak to a little bit about intentionality.
So intentionality, I mean, we can look at our state's demographics and we can break down the percentage of white people compared to black people, men compared to women, other communities of color, and break it down. And then you could look at an institution of higher ed and, like, does our population reflect the true population of our state? Okay, if it doesn't, why are we not being successful in having those populations represented on our campus? You know, do we need to do intentional outreach to certain communities to ensure that we've got, you know, programs and pathways to jobs that are great paying jobs in Arkansas? I love the word intentionality, and I think that we should be really careful about confusing preferential treatment with just intentional. Like me picking up the phone and calling, hey Roby, I was thinking of you today, I think you should apply for this, or there's a great opportunity to talk about business and politics on a different scale.
You should create a TV show to do that.
I create a TV show, but it's, you know, it's being intentional, and I think we do not need to shackle our institutions, our education or government institutions, on how they can be intentional in ensuring that what we offer already is getting to all Arkansans. Yeah.
There will be some more conversations on this in the coming week. I think you'll be involved in some stuff that may be public, maybe private. I mean, the bill sponsor and some of the other senators and some of the folks that weren't there to basically talk about this bill in committee because you didn't know what the bill was going to be about in committee.
We were under a winter storm warning all week, and I'm pretty sure the day they had this, like, I was at home with my toddler. I'm like, wait, what just happened?
So what do you expect to happen? What do you hope will happen in this continuing dialogue?
Well, and dialogue is a great word. I hope there's an open dialogue about what is the true intention, what are the true concerns. Have you considered the unintended consequences that could really move our state backward? You know, economic development, economic mobility of Arkansans should truly be a nonpartisan issue. Like, we really want our state to succeed. We want our state to have a competitive advantage. We have got to think really slowly about what we might do that would push our state behind nationally, globally, and being intentional about how we lift up our, you know, populations of people that for historical reasons have not been able to participate.
The Women's Foundation of Arkansas does a lot of really interesting and good work. Girls of Promise is one of those things. Top 100 Women in Arkansas is another. I'm running out of time, but I'm going to give you a chance to plug the website.
Great. We are the Women's Foundation of Arkansas, womensfoundationarkansas.org, and you've touched on a few. There's a lot more. I hope people check it out.
All right. Anna Beth, thank you so much for being here. All right. We're back to wrap up right after this.